It can find software vulnerabilities that have survived years of human review, and it's so powerful that access is being tightly controlled. Today, we're unpacking Mythos, the AI model that's forcing the cybersecurity industry to rethink what's possible. Let's break it all down on this episode of Open Source Open Mic.
This is Open Source Open Mic, the podcast where we talk about everything happening in the world of open source security. So pull up a chair. It's time for an open conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Open Source Open Mic. My name is Andrew Garrett, and I work in product marketing here at Sonatype. I'm pleased to be joined today by Ilkka Turunen, and Ilkka is the field CTO here at Sonatype. He's based in the UK in London, and so I'm glad to have him for a few minutes. It's the afternoon for him, it's the morning for me here in Utah, but we're going to have a great conversation today. Ilkka, is there anything else you'd like to say about yourself, about your background?
Oh, really, just that I'm really excited to be here. Really looking forward to the conversation. I've obviously been with Sonosite for 11 years. Been working quite a lot, seeing the sort of software supply chain terminology and phenomenon that really come together over time. So we kind of started from DevSecOps and moved on into sort of serious at-scale supply chain management as an industry throughout the course of these years. So really have been sort of working with customers and organizations and governments on it along the way. So it's a pretty interesting topic what we're going to be talking about today. So really excited.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here, Ilkka. And our topic today is going to be all around Mythos. We've been hearing a lot about it. Mythos is basically Claude's version of an AI security tool, but I want to hear it from you because you're the expert here. Can you give us a quick background on Mythos, what it is, and why we keep hearing about it?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, let's start with the very, very basics. Mythos, which is, by the way, a Greek-derived word, which is why it's pronounced mythos, I was told recently, is the next version of the Anthropic Claude foundation model. So it's essentially, think about Claude Opus 4.6, 4.7, which are sort of the currently available foundation models. This is going to be the next spearhead model that's going to come out there. They've been testing it internally for a while, and they released a private beta or private preview of it to selected organizations over the line. And in that course of testing, what they've realized is that the Mythos model continues both on the linear growth of these foundation models to be fairly good at code production. So each of the foundation models, especially over the last sort of 9 months, have really made leaps and bounds in their ability to produce code that starts to be a lot higher quality than just sort of code assistant type of work. And over the course of that testing, they also realized that it's a particularly good model at reasoning, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. So there are some write-ups that they've released that describe situations where, for example, the model supposedly was completely offline. It was left to work on a puzzle. They figured out the puzzle, and then it let its owner know through an email message saying, "Hey, by the way, I've solved it," which is a bit of an interesting situation because the model was supposed to be completely air-gapped. So it had sort of reasoned its way from that air-gapped network into an email server somewhere, and then found a way of informing the researcher that was working on it at the time.
Wow.
Um, there's been other organizations playing around with it, testing things. Firefox, for example, or the Mozilla Foundation released a blog post where they said that the latest release of Firefox actually contains something like 270 security vulnerability fixes that were discovered using this Mythos model. And there are sort of corroborating stories elsewhere. In fact, Anthropic says that in our testing, as we've kind of played around with it, it's been able to uncover new and previously unknown security vulnerabilities at a rate that known human researchers have been able to do. For example, there's like a famous case of a 27-year-old vulnerability discovered in OpenBSD that was sort of hiding there until Mythos was able to sort of piece different pieces of information together and build a working exploit based on that. So there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of sort of conversation about, is it this capable? I don't think that there's any reason to not believe that it represents a sort of step in function increase in terms of the ability of these foundation models to conduct cybersecurity, activities like vulnerability discovery as well as exploitation. And that, of course, is creating a little bit of tension because that creates an advantage, especially for adversaries, because they if they can discover previously unknown zero days and put them into production faster than ever, that places quite a lot of pressure on organizations to be able to act on those as they are discovered and do so quickly. So really, I think it's a good example of how the models are evolving, how fast that evolution is now going, and that just means that everything's going to speed up. Yeah, and the level of discovery is going to speed up, the level of code is going to speed up, the ability to produce both attacks and patches for said issues is going to increase. So we're entering into interesting times, and that's why there's sort of a lot of collective anxiety, I'd say, about, hey, what does this mean? I feel like we're talking about another Y2K, frankly. It's that sort of like, it's coming, it's happening. And as a result, like there's a lot of focus going on right now on what do we as an industry, as organizations need to do in order to be ready for it.
Yeah, the hype is real and the anxiety is real, and it's not just in our industry. I mean, just the other day I was having a conversation with one of my friends, at outside of work, he doesn't work in the cybersecurity industry at all, but he knows that I do, and he asked me about Mythos and what my thoughts were on it, and I would like to pose the same question to you, Ilka. How do you think Mythos will shape the cybersecurity industry? What predictions do you have about the evolution of where Mythos will take us?
I think it's a really good question. I think I've been asked that question quite a lot over the last month or so. Um, So, like I said, it represents an increase in capability. And what that really is going to mean is that even if they hold this release back, that doesn't mean that models won't reach that capability elsewhere. There's already indications that the latest Codex models from OpenAI, as an example, are able to do similar cybersecurity type activities at the same level as the Mythos model. So, I think it's a reasonable estimate that within the next 6 to 12 months, other model families are going to catch up in terms of capability. Meaning that this is just going to be the next new watermark for models and their ability to both produce code and discover these vulnerabilities and execute these attacks. That's fact number one. The fact number two is right now it will give an asymmetric advantage to attackers because if they're able to use these next generation models to discover new previously unknown security vulnerabilities and put them into exploitation, then that obviously represents a lot of risk for downstream organizations, subjected to these attacks. And more so, if there's indications that what really is going to happen is that the level of vulnerabilities being discovered is just going to increase. There's already been, if you look at the last 5 years, about a nearly 300% increase in the total amount of security vulnerabilities being discovered on an annual basis compared to the beginning of the decade. And that it can be largely attributed to AI tools helping that discovery. Like literally just the other day, the maintainer of Linux, Linus Torvalds, said in an email list that their security list currently is unmanageable because so many people are using these AI tools to discover security vulnerabilities. They're all overlapping. So from a defender perspective, that's going to put a lot of pressure. You're going to get a lot of bug reports. You're going to get a lot of notices of new security vulnerabilities. So being able to prioritize quickly, hey, what do we do with these? Do they affect us? Do we have this software? Do we have to apply a patch, develop a patch, all of that sort of stuff? Has this been even reported to us before? Is going to become really, really important. And part of the reason why the collective anxiety kind of exists is that that ability to, when we look at historic incidents of like high severity security vulnerabilities, that muscle just hasn't been there. Um, we looked at something like Log4Shell as an example, um, 5, 6 years ago when that happened. 10 out of 10 security vulnerability in an extremely popular open source library. It took the industry about a year to drop below 40% download rates of
Wow.
vulnerable versions of Log4j. It took a really long time. We heard of companies that took months and months and months to go back to business as usual as a result. That's just one security vulnerability. Now imagine that there's a vulnerability of that magnitude every week in something
Mm.
really popular. That's sort of the scale and step increase that might happen. But of course, on the positive side, if you think about it from a sort of less doom and gloom, what that also means that is that organizations are able to use these models effectively, put them into play, develop patches faster, defend against these new vulnerabilities faster. Um, and use that capability also to apply defense in depth in a way that we probably have never been able to do as an industry. So either way, it sort of represents the direction that the entire software economy is going. We're going into an agentic transformation. And from a cybersecurity perspective, it just means there's just going to be more of everything. There's going to be more security vulnerabilities. There's going to be more disclosures. There's going to be more patching required, both of your own software as well as your vendor software. And thinking about that new scale, I think, if you think about that scale as sort of 50x increase in CVs being discovered, I don't think that that would be far off from what we're going to see.
Yeah, it sounds like everything's just accelerating because, like you said, we have more security vulnerabilities, but we also have faster patches now, faster time to remediation. So let's talk about that pace. For those of us that are in the industry, how do we keep up with this accelerated pace? What can we do to stay ahead of this acceleration that we're seeing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, first the bad news. Just over a month ago, basically the foundational security vulnerability database, the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, that is run by the U.S. National Institute of Standards, announced that they're reducing their scope of processing security vulnerabilities. So it used to be that, you'd open a CVE, then that would go through the NVD process and, get things like, hey, what does this affect? What applications are covered by this vulnerability? What is the severity of this vulnerability? All those sort of foundational things that organizations use to prioritize these vulnerabilities. Now, what they're saying is we are only going, because of the sheer volume of things being reported to us, we are only going to prioritize stuff that is used by the US federal government, stuff that is on the known exploitable vulnerability list, which is also a US government list, and things that fall under a specific, criticality designations in the US. So what that means really is
Mm.
that almost immediately they said we're not going to process 130,000 security vulnerabilities that were waiting in line to be processed because we don't rank them. So from a defense perspective, that's really going to mean that the sources of truth are going to get more fragmented. When when these models discover these vulnerabilities, they're not going to wait for a CVE to be raised. They're going to go into production right now. So that means that discovering these vulnerabilities is going to require in-depth mining of bug trackers, of issue trackers, of GitHub accounts, all of those sorts of things, which is no minor undertaking, I know, because that's what we do as an organization. One of the key things and capabilities that we've been developing over the years is our ability to monitor the software supply chain at scale, look at all of these things, and discover security vulnerabilities when they are discovered by the projects, as opposed to waiting for them to appear on some database. So the defense model is going to get a lot more fragmented. So you need to find a way of finding a source of truth like us that is able to tell you about the supply chain, that is able to sort of do a lot of that deduplication and that prioritization that's no longer happening at an industry level.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned some of the capabilities that Sonatype offers when it comes to continuous monitoring, making sure that your software supply chain is, clear of any malicious vulnerabilities that could be coming in. But Let's talk more about some of the best practices. Uh, you know, whether you're a Sonatype customer or not, what are some of the best practices that everyone should be doing in order to secure their software supply chains and embrace this new age of cybersecurity?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. We just literally wrote a white paper about the subject quite recently because I think this is sort of a time not to reinvent the wheel, not to forget the lessons of the past. So we as an industry have been spending 20 years or so building these DevSecOps models. And the good news here is that none of this is a new threat landscape. There's certainly new types of velocity concerns. But if you really think
Mhm.
about it fundamentally, if our agents are writing more code, they're using more open source, our software supply chains are going to get bigger. At the same time, attackers are looking at software supply chains. They're trying to find new vulnerabilities. That really means that you need to find ways of getting back to the basics, asking yourself, over the next 30 days or so, even some very basic questions like, do we have centralization of our artifacts? Do we have central ingestion points where our developers are downloading open source? Do we know all of our vendors? Can we acquire SBOMs of the software of all of our vendors? Can we produce SBOMs of the software that we write ourselves? That's been a conversation we've been having as an industry for the last half a decade, literally since Log4Shell. But now is a good time, and it's a great catalyst to really drill back down into those sort of fundamental basics. Because if a security vulnerability happens tomorrow, the incident's going to go like this. Hey, which applications are affected? Do we know how to patch it? Do we know what versions are safe? Do we know what versions are not safe? Um, and even just doing that basic kind of tabletop exercise or even running a fire drill can really uncover some of those sort of fundamental questions like, do we even have the capability of this? How would we get alerted about a new security vulnerability tomorrow in one of the open source components that we have? Are the tools that we use just leveraging these open databases? Are they genuinely monitoring these things live or not? That's question number one. There's also the point of setting some KPIs of what do you think should happen when an incident like that happens. If we assume that one's happening every week, then what is the MTTR that we're going to be shooting for? Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a couple of days? I don't think there's a right answer per se, but you do need to have a little bit of a think of what the strategy here is in this supply chain incident type of world. Um, and then basic things like who's responsible for what, who's responsible for this application. If an incident happens, we triage the right application. We know where it's affecting us. Who does the fix? Do we go in and fix it by ourselves? Do we instruct the team? Who's the responsible party? A fire drill is a wonderful thing to really shake those sort of questions out. It really kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of ownership and control, for sure. But over the next 30 days, that's literally what we're advocating people to do is really think about those basic control points that you have. Think about the basic individuals assigned to these things. Think about the prioritization mechanism you'd have if you think about this new scale, and then find ways of proving or not proving that you have this level of coverage.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because, like you said, we're not reinventing the wheel here. This is the threats are not new. The vulnerabilities, none of this is new. And if you have the security controls in place that we've always had, or the last, like you said, half a decade, we've been recommending these things. And it's just making sure you have these controls in place so that when threats do arise, you're prepared, you're ready to address it. And hopefully this whole experience of speeding things up, speeding up the pace of DevSecOps. Hopefully, it's a lesson for all of us on best practices and what we need.
Well, it is also a lesson of it's no longer sort of an aspirational thing to shift left,
Mm.
especially as we move ourselves from a human-driven SDLC and we're moving into an agent-driven or agent-controlled SDLC. I think we're going to be sort of in a hybrid situation for a long time to come. You need to ask questions like, are we even grounding our agents right? How would our agents know about new security vulnerabilities or new supply chain attacks? Here's a little rhetorical question for you, Andrew. Um, Not so rhetorical though. When is the knowledge? Do you know when the knowledge cutoff date of ChatGPT is?
The knowledge cutoff date of ChatGPT, it's got to be within the last 5 years, I would think.
It is. It is. It's in fact, I believe the consumer versions that most people tend to use sit somewhere around late 2024. So,
Hmm.
a little bit of a foundational architectural piece of knowledge about just the LLMs that power these agents is that they naturally do not know anything past their knowledge cutoff date because they are trained up to data on that date. So, for example, if you ask Opus 4.7, which is the current bleeding edge model of Anthropic's Claude, as an example, that knowledge cutoff date sits somewhere around early 2025. So, and
Wow.
you can literally go and ask the model that question, and the model will answer and say, here's the date cutoff that I have. That represents a natural gap of, both from a security perspective as well as a productivity perspective. Because if you think about things like, hey, should I be using this version of open source? Does this version of this NPM package, is it actually affected by a malware attack? The foundation models right now have no way of knowing without grounding that information because they just have not been trained on that data at all.
Hmm.
So, one of the sort of key things to be thinking about is as you introduce these agents, it's not only just that you're going to have to use them to produce patches. It's also that you're going to have to think about how do we ground these no models in the knowledge of today, because these supply chain attacks really they are short-lived events. They rely on the fact that you don't know about them yet. They fly under the radar. When they become known, that kills the taps. So the sooner you can get the knowledge, and especially to your agents as they start taking over some of these patching activities, the better it is because that means that you're able to execute things at a faster clip. That's probably one of the sort of biggest risks to these kind of programs right now is that gap is well known, it's well understood, and there are no easy solutions except, of course, what we can offer to organizations to help ground those agents.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's even more recent than I thought. You're saying, end of 2024, beginning of 2025, that's the knowledge cutoff date for some of these models. I was thinking it was even longer than that. It feels like AI has been here for longer than it has. I was thinking, okay, maybe 2021, 2022, around there, but it really is so new. We're recording this in 2026, and yeah, the thought that it's really only been around for a year, 2 years, uh, that is very interesting, and I like the point that you mentioned about this hybrid approach. It's not fully agentic. We can't fully hand the reins off to AI at this point. We need that human element that actually grounds the AI in the intelligence that we have as humans, because our knowledge cutoff date is much, much longer than 2024. We go back quite a ways. So I like the hybrid approach. It's a good point that you make there.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's not only just about humans, but it's also about the fact that there's a lot of intelligence, specialist intelligence, takes a lot of time to gather. The models just don't have that data by default. And also that landscape is evolving at all times. The models also don't have the human tribal knowledge. Like human developers, we know where the CI system is, we know what best practices are, we know what not to do. The models lack all of that organizational context. So to be able to also ground them on what not to do is very important because that's how you avoid a lot of sort of reasoning loops. That's how you avoid a lot of long-term patching issues, but also avoid the model falling foul of like a known ransomware attack package, as an example.
Hmm. No, that's a great point. Well, Ilka, I know we're at time here, but as we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you, do you have any final thoughts, any final recommendations for people around Mythos or around AI in general?
Well, I think the Mythos situation really, as we discussed, is a case of more is more. The speed of all activities is going to speed up. Your ability to produce code yourself is going to speed up. The ability for adversaries to be discovering new vulnerabilities and putting them into active exploitation is going to speed up. So sort of recognizing that that's where the puck is going, I think is a really good and important exercise to be running now. We've got about 30 to 90 days before the first vulnerability starts dropping. Not all of them are critical, mind you. Not all the 3,000 vulnerabilities they claim are going to be at that severe critical range. So a lot of it is going to be less severe stuff. But asking those fundamental questions now of would we know where this would affect us? How would we deal with one a week? One a day, even. Whatever that pace is going to be. It affects the answers, and it kind of forces you to think about some of the fundamentals. Do we have the fundamentals in place? Maybe we couldn't require our human developers to go through a centralized artifact repo to get open source, but maybe we should do that for all of our agents, if nothing else. So asking those sort of basic questions now, I think, is very important. And working with vendors like ourselves, who are specialists in the field, will help make that process go faster as well. So don't be a stranger.
I love it. Well, thanks, Ilka. Again, thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on Mythos. It's clear that you're an expert on the topic, and this is something that is very new to a lot of us. So to have people like you who are very well versed on the subject, it's very helpful. So thank you for taking some time today. And to our viewers who are watching this episode, I want to remind you to please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Or if you're listening on Spotify, please leave us a review. And we'll see you next time on another episode of Open Source Open Mic. Thanks.